I want to talk with you about something explicitly other than COVID-19. But first, I'm going to get there by talking about it. I've heard the word unprecedented used a lot to describe our current situation. And I'm sure you've heard it too. We are living in unprecedented times, or perhaps we're experiencing an unprecedented crisis. I'm convinced you've heard some variation of that theme. And I imagine that I've even used that language myself, as have many of you listening. But the reality is that this present crisis, it's a lot of things, but it's anything but unprecedented. So far, over 500,000 people have died from the virus, and that loss of life is an enormous tragedy. Yet it's not a singular event in the course of human history. The Spanish flu in 1918 killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide, and it infected roughly a third of the population at the time. The Black Death in the 14th century, it killed between 75 to 200 million, depending on which historian you hold by. The point of all of this is I want us to recognize that the current trial we are living through, it was actually quite precedented. What was unprecedented was what most of us believed just a few months ago, that something like this could never happen, that we were living in a time in human history when we had this belief that a virus could not hurt us. Now, sure, there were those who warned us about potential danger, but who would listen to such fear-mongering? Who believed that something like COVID could ever happen in 2020, in the most developed civilization since life first came on our planet? And I bring this up because I believe it's a fair analogy to what I actually want to talk about this morning. It is amazing to be a Jew in 2020, especially in North America. Sure, there are anti-Semites around us, but we have achieved a level of acceptance and safety in society at large that most Jews who came before us never could have imagined. Yet at the same time, I hear there is an unprecedented level of anti-Semitism in our world. And I want to be clear, the numbers are rising. They're rising here in North America just as they've been in Europe over the past decade, as well as in other parts of the world. But what we are seeing is anything but unprecedented. We only have to look in our Parshat, and we can see in Balak a case study of what happens when someone has hatred simply for someone else being the other. Yet sadly, we don't have to go that far back in Jewish history, because our story, the story of hating those who are different, it's one that's played out in many times and places. Spanish Jewry, those living in the Islamic Empire, they experienced what many historians refer to as the golden age for Jews. Those living through it believed truly they were in unprecedented times. That was until they weren't. Until violent attacks began happening more and more often, culminating in the Granada massacre, in which, according to some, over 1,500 Jewish families were murdered in a single day. Jewish life in Christian Europe, again in the Middle Ages, was not so bad. Jewish communities flourished in the Rhineland and Western Germany. That is until the First Crusades, when whole communities were wiped out. The same with Jews in France. They too believed they were living in an unprecedented time. A safe place where Jewish life developed so well that many of the great rabbinic commentators on the Torah and the Talmud came from there. The Jewish academies at the time were places of incredible scholarship. They produced works we still study today. But then came the Second Crusade, and again, whole communities were wiped out. What was unprecedented was not the violence, but the belief that it could never happen to them. We all know the story too well in the 20th century. Germany at the time was possibly one of the greatest places to be Jewish since the fall of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. And those living there believed they had found a promised land, a place where they could live in peace, where they could integrate in larger society to an unprecedented degree. But then came Hitler and the Nazis, death and destruction, at a level never before seen in history. Yet the hatred that drove it was the same one we've experienced as a people more times than I can count. What was unprecedented in these moments was not the hate, but believing it could never happen to them. What was unprecedented was to believe we are past the point in our story when our enemies would seek to destroy us violently. In each of these moments in history, there were those who warned others, refused to believe that such atrocities were solely a thing in the past, unimaginable in the present. But people didn't listen. They believed they were living in unprecedented times. Those sounding the alarm were labeled fearmongers, rabble-rousers, just as scientists and health experts who tried to warn the world that even in 2020, even with all the technological advances, the medical wisdom we possessed, a simple virus could bring the world to its knees. I don't want to be a fearmonger. I really do believe that being a Jew today in North America is a peak in Jewish history, a peak we've never seen before. That the establishment of a Jewish state, a safe haven for our people, is the answer to 2,000 years of prayer. And yet I want to remind us, what is unprecedented is not the hatred we see around us. It is the belief that what happened time and time again to our ancestors could never happen to us. I want to look at a couple examples. Just this month, and just here in Toronto, there was a York University law professor who stated, Zionism isn't about self-determination, it's about Jewish supremacy. He went on to equate white supremacy with Zionism, and even to assert that accusing Israel of exaggerating the Holocaust could be for some a plausible argument. This is a professor at a major university here who teaches, among other things, international human rights. Many of you may have seen this week images from a social media account of a local restaurant that have been making the rounds in Jewish circles. This local establishment serves both a healthy menu of food along with cliché anti-Semitic tropes. In their Canada Day post on social media, they wrote, "Above all, Canada is controlled by genocidal Zionists that interfere with our democracy, media, economy, and basic human rights." The owner has stated that Zionists are not welcome in her establishment. What shocked me personally in reading these articles was not the stories or the comments, but how many people have been defending their statements and how many others have chosen to remain silent. How many have written off this case and so many other examples of blatant anti-Semitism because we live in unprecedented times, because what happened in the past could never happen again. We believe it's impossible for us to experience the atrocities of our ancestors, for those to happen in a place like Canada in the 21st century. Yet these incidents take place on the backdrop of a steady rise in violent attacks on Jews in North America and around the world. I too want to believe we are past those points in history, and I don't want to be stirring up fear. But the one lesson we should take from history is that history repeats itself. Modern civilization has advanced in incredible ways, yet a simple virus can shut down the world. And hatred, if left unchecked, it spreads until it is too late. Our tradition has an important lesson. It teaches that to stop the cycle, we need to speak out. Remember Joseph and his brothers. They too believed they were living in unprecedented times. Life in Egypt was pretty great. As opposed to being nomads or shepherds, Joseph rose up in political power, integrated in Egyptian society. His brothers and his families were welcomed in. Yet then a new king arose in Egypt, and we know how that story ends. But I want to share with you an interesting midrash, a rabbinic story that fills in the gaps in the Torah narrative. In the Talmud, Rabbi Sachs teaches that Pharaoh is afraid of the Israelites, and he summoned the wisest advisors he could find to offer advice on how to deal with them. These men were Balaam, Job, and Yitro. Balaam suggested that he kill the Israelites, leading to the policy of throwing the male infants into the Nile. Job remained silent. And Yitro, on the other hand, spoke out against the plan, and for that he had to flee into the wilderness. The teaching continues. It was for his wicked plan that Balaam gave Pharaoh, that he was killed, coming up in the book of Numbers. Similarly, it was for remaining silent that Job was punished. Yitro, even though he alone couldn't stop the plan, because he spoke out, he was rewarded with the high position his descendants would rise to in Jewish history. It's an interesting story. It brings together some unlikely characters. Yet the message is clear. The suffering endured in Egypt was brought about by one person speaking hate and another person remaining silent. Yitro spoke up. He didn't care about the consequences. He spoke for what is right. And yet, sadly, his voice alone was not enough. Who knows what might have happened if Job had spoken up too, rather than remaining silent? Life as a Jew in Toronto is really great as far as Jewish history goes. It is difficult to see these and other examples as more than one-off occurrences of people on the fringe. Even as a Jew who experiences it, how much more so would it be for our non-Jewish brothers and sisters to recognize these are more than one-off examples, to recognize what it feels like as a Jew? How much more difficult must it be for them to see how these single instances of anti-Semitic hate add up to for the Jewish community? As I pondered this, it occurred to me, how many members of other minority groups must feel the same way, must feel the same frustration, writing off incidents of hate as one-off examples, yet living in fear of what they combine into? How many of them must feel the same frustration I feel trying to explain it to others? How to explain to others about their story and what it feels like to be them. The same way I want them to listen to us when we voice our concerns. The same way I'm disappointed when my fears and my experiences are dismissed. It's how it must feel to them, explaining what it's like to be Black or Latino or Indigenous or a member of any other minority group, even in 2020. We must speak out. We must listen. We cannot be like Job. We cannot remain silent. But that's my question to us this morning. How often are we really like him? How often do we remain silent? Maybe for a variety of reasons. It takes too much time. We're already focused on so many other causes. There are so many other things pulling our attention. I mean, we are living through a pandemic. Yet at the same time, we must speak out. We cannot be like Job. We must be like Yitro. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, some are guilty, but all are responsible in a society. History has shown us that to believe humanity is past causing unimaginable suffering to someone simply for being different, it's not unprecedented. It's unprecedented if that were actually true. And I'm very much afraid it is not. I hope that we can. I pray that we are capable, and I believe we truly are. But only if we stand up together, if we stand up for each other and in one voice, we say no to all forms of hate. Then and only then will we actually be living in unprecedented times. Shabbat Shalom.